What if everything you thought you were watching wasn't actually the full story? Because when you really step back and look at what's happening here, this doesn't feel like just another relationship going through a rough patch. And before we go deeper, make sure you hit subscribe because this situation is still unfolding and you're going to want to see how it all plays out. It feels like something much deeper, something that's been building over time, quietly, until it reached a point where it could no longer be ignored. And that's exactly why so many people are starting to feel frustrated, not just because of what happened, but because of what it represents. The lack of honesty, the lack of accountability, and more importantly, the patterns that keep repeating in ways that are becoming impossible to overlook. When you look at the dynamic between Ken and Tricia, it doesn't just feel unstable on the surface. It feels like two people trying to hold something together without ever addressing what's actually broken underneath. And that's where everything starts to fall apart. If there's one thing that really shifted how people see this situation, it's the way Ken handled everything, especially when it came to the direct messages. Because it wasn't just the action itself that caught attention, it was his reaction to it. There was no real sense of urgency, no visible regret, no attempt to genuinely explain himself in a way that showed he understood the impact of what he did. Instead, it came across as casual, almost dismissive, like it wasn't something worth taking seriously. And that kind of response says more than the situation itself ever could. Because when someone is in a relationship and openly admits to entertaining other people, yet shows little to no concern about it, the issue becomes bigger than just the act. It becomes about respect, about priorities, and about how seriously they actually take the relationship they claim to be in. It starts to feel less like a mistake and more like a reflection of mindset, and that's what makes people question everything. What makes it even more frustrating is how everything was presented so casually, almost like an unspoken message of "this is who I am, take it or leave it." And while honesty is often seen as a positive thing, there's a clear difference between being honest and being careless. Honesty without empathy doesn't build trust, it breaks it. It can come across as dismissive, even disrespectful, especially in situations where emotions are already involved. In this case, it didn't feel like transparency for the sake of growth or understanding. It felt like a lack of accountability disguised as honesty. And that's exactly why people are no longer just questioning what Ken did, but why he did it, and what that says about his intentions moving forward. Because when actions and reactions don't align with the idea of commitment, it becomes harder to believe that the relationship is being taken seriously at all. At the same time, Tricia's response adds a completely different layer to the situation, and it's one that's just as important to understand. Instead of confronting things directly in the moment, it feels like she internalizes a lot of what she's experiencing. There's hesitation, there's silence, and while that might seem like a way to keep things from escalating, it actually creates a different kind of problem. Because when something hurts and it isn't expressed clearly, it doesn't disappear, it builds over time. That emotional weight doesn't just fade away, it grows, and eventually it reaches a point where it comes out in ways that are much harder to manage. And that's what creates this underlying tension. On one side, you have someone acting without much visible concern, and on the other, someone reacting without fully communicating what they're feeling. That disconnect is what makes everything feel so fragile. When you step back and look at it from the outside, it becomes harder to see this as two people actively trying to fix a relationship. Instead, it starts to look like two people moving in completely different directions while still holding on to the idea of being together. Ken appears to be doing what he wants, operating with a level of independence that doesn't reflect commitment, while Tricia seems to be processing everything internally without fully addressing it head-on. That imbalance creates confusion, not just for them, but for anyone watching. And this is where the idea of playing games starts to make more sense, not in a dramatic or exaggerated way, but in a subtle, almost unintentional way where neither side is fully aligned with the reality of the relationship. They're connected by title, but disconnected by behavior, and that's what makes the situation feel so unstable. Then comes Marsau's perspective, and this is where things take a different turn, because instead of adding more emotion or escalating the situation, he brings in something much more grounded: logic. He doesn't need to raise his voice or create drama to make his point. He simply highlights something that becomes difficult to argue against. You can't build something strong if your actions already show that you're halfway out. And when you really think about it, that statement alone captures the entire situation. Moving out, talking to other people, acting in ways that suggest independence while still claiming commitment sends a clear message, whether it's intentional or not. And what makes his input stand out is the calmness behind it. Sometimes the most impactful observations are the ones delivered without emotion, because they force reflection instead of reaction. At its core, this situation goes far beyond messages or communication styles. It comes down to trust, and once trust starts to weaken, everything else begins to shift with it. Conversations don't feel the same anymore. Silences carry more weight, small actions start to feel significant, and doubt begins to replace certainty. And the difficult part about trust is that once it's broken, it's not easily restored. It requires consistent effort, clear communication, and genuine accountability. Without those things, the relationship doesn't necessarily end immediately, but it begins to deteriorate slowly, piece by piece, until there's very little left to hold on to. Another key detail that changes how this situation is being viewed is the idea of repetition. This doesn't come across as a one-time mistake or an isolated incident. It feels like a pattern, and patterns carry a different kind of weight because they suggest consistency. When certain behaviors keep showing up over time, it becomes harder to dismiss them as accidents or misunderstandings. Instead, they start to define the dynamic itself. And once people recognize a pattern, the focus shifts. It's no longer about fixing one issue, it becomes about questioning whether the relationship as a whole is sustainable in its current form. There is also a noticeable gap between how things might appear on the surface and what seems to be happening underneath. From the outside, it could easily be interpreted as a relationship facing temporary challenges, but when you pay closer attention, it feels more like a deeper misalignment. Differences in communication, differences in expectations, and differences in how problems are handled all contribute to a constant sense of tension. And when those differences aren't addressed directly, they don't just go away. They continue to grow, creating distance even when both people are technically still together. Right now, everything feels like it's reached a turning point. The situation has unfolded in a way that can't simply be brushed aside anymore, and that changes what comes next. Because once the truth is out in the open, there are really only two directions things can go. Either there's a shift toward accountability, honest communication, and real effort to repair what's been damaged, or things continue as they are, slowly breaking down over time. And that's what makes this moment so important. It's not just about what's already happened, it's about what happens next, because the next steps won't just explain the situation, they'll define it.